Even after The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air wrapped up over 20 years ago, people are still able to rap the theme song on cue. Its lasting appeal is undeniably impressive, and one that continues to stick through the generations. But what makes it so unbelievably catchy and stick into everyone's mind? Some people might say it's the lyrics because, well, that's usually the first thing people think about when they hear the theme song.
In West Philadelphia, born and raised.
Shooting some people outside of the school.
And while the lyrics play a huge part to it, I think there's a lot more going on underneath the surface. In my opinion, the reason the Fresh Prince rap is such a timeless song has to do with the music's ability to not only represent the show's story that the lyrics are talking about, but also embody Will Smith's character.
Michael Jordan, Al Capone, Woody Woodpecker, Fred Flintstone.
But how does it do this? Well, we first have to establish what the theme song even represents. What should the song The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air even try to say? And I think a good place to start is just by watching the show. We see a story about a street-smart, eccentric teenager taken from a working-class background and placed into an upper-class world. The humor behind the differences in socioeconomic classes, personalities, despite belonging in the same extended family, is really what the show's all about. Differences despite similarities. Now, we can try to write great lyrics to represent this story, and we definitely hear that in the music. But behind some different music, let's say with a more generic beat and composition, the theme just doesn't sound right. It doesn't fit with the show.
Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like...
On the contrary, if we were to play some other lyrics on top of the original theme, we get something that still sounds like the Fresh Prince, despite the lyrics having nothing to do with the character.
Sicker than your average, pop a twist cabbage off instinct. Niggas don't think shit stink, pink gators.
You probably recognize by now that you can't just write lyrics that talk about the story to make a good theme song. The music behind the theme has to feel like the story. That's what separates the mediocre music from the best. In this case, there specifically has to be a feeling of Will Smith's goofy, comedic energy, but also that real cultural conflict between West Philadelphia and Bel-Air that happens constantly throughout the show. So after spending a couple of hours reproducing the Fresh Prince theme song, let's see what we can find out from the music on how it might represent these two ideas. Let's start by taking a look at the most obvious part of the song, which is the beat and bass line. It's a pretty simple pattern with 5 sounds: the kick, snare, tambourine, bass line, and this sound called the vibroslap. But if you take a closer look at how these instruments are played, what they musically represent is Will Smith's character. Again, we're trying to show that fun, eccentric, and quirky persona, and what better way to do this than to use the influences of a fun, eccentric, and quirky style of music, like jazz. We hear things like swing beat tambourines, offbeat kick drums, and we even include the vibroslap, which historically originated from a quijada, an instrument often used in Afro-Peruvian and Latin music, which are often energetic in nature. But probably most important is this bass line. Do you hear what's special about it? Well, it's this note right here. You see, a quick Google search on the key of the song shows E flat minor, meaning that the song should only be using these notes right here. And well, if you look closely again, you'll see that this D note in the bass line doesn't normally fit this key, and we hear that. It sounds just slightly off and out of place. And that's because the song is not in E flat minor. Well, at least the bass line isn't. The bass line has been bebopped. This is just my way of saying that instead of using our conventional E flat minor scale, we have an additional note called a passing tone that slides between two of the notes, making it an 8-tone scale instead of a conventional 7-tone scale. These 8-tone bebop scales are very frequently used in jazz improvisation. It makes it so that you can almost transition and pass through certain notes. But more importantly, this passing tone, at least to Western musical ears, feels like it fits and doesn't fit at the same time. You see, here's what the bass line would sound like without the passing tone. Everything seems to fit, there's no problems. But once we add this tone, things get a little weird as the chromatic rise sort of makes sense in isolation. But in a group of notes like in a scale, it falls a little out of place. I would say the feeling the bass line gives of fitting in but also falling out of place is much like the feeling that people get about Will Smith living in Bel-Air. It makes sense for him to be in the Banks family for safety reasons, but at the same time, he's also off and out of place due to his strange personality and socioeconomic differences with the Banks family. These similarities between the bass line and Will Smith is probably the reason why the bass line is played heavily throughout the song, because, well, he is the main character of the show.
That was incredible.
Now this brings me to this iconic violin melody along with these electric piano chords. First listen, I thought this violin did musically represent Will, since, well, it is the melody that's played in the chorus and the thing that people recognize the most outside of the words. But then I thought, why have all instruments where they use a violin to represent Will, and not like a saxophone or a Rhodes piano or anything else? It just seems too smooth or classy and formal of an instrument to show such a street-smart, laid-back character. Not only that, but the melody along with the electric piano chords is perceived to be in E-flat minor instead of a bebop scale that we talked about in the bass line, since there's no D note, which makes it sound darker. This gives us a very different feeling from what's expected from Will, who seems to be beaming with positivity and confidence. But if you look at the placement of this melody in relation to the lyrics, and outside of standard placements in the chorus, we get something very interesting. The melody is placed into scenes that seem to foreshadow Will's future life in Bel-Air. Once when he gets into a fight that forces him to move to Bel-Air,
And a couple of guys who were up to no good started making trouble in my neighborhood. I got in
and the other with the famous dice cab that takes him to the Banks house in Bel-Air.
I whistled for a cab, and when it came near, the license plate said fresh and it had dice in the mirror.
Which leads me to believe that this violin melody is not representing Will, but the Banks family, and more specifically, Will's future conflicts and influence with the Banks family. Part of it I think is due to the fact that the violins just by nature feel and sound more calm and elegant, something more commonly resembling a typical family in a rich neighborhood like Bel-Air.
Oh yes, listen now. Listen to the violins. Beautiful.
But on top of that, I think the reason why this section is written in E-flat minor has to do with showing that feeling of upcoming conflict. You can really hear a clash of differences between the rich and the poor that ultimately drives the show. But imagine if the melody was written in, say, the major key. You wouldn't really get that same feeling. It's a combination of the composition and the instruments that really represent the Banks family's conflict with Will. But at the same time, we still hear some of Will's influences on the Banks family and how he integrates and changes them just like he does throughout the show, with these small, quick violin riffs that resemble Will's showy and quick-witted nature. We could easily make it sound more Banks-like by removing this little part right here and replacing it with something less Will-like. But frankly, this sounds a little boring. Probably just like the Banks family would have been without Will in the picture.
Yo, the plane ride was stupid. I was up in first class, man. No, stupid, dope. Oh no, that doesn't mean what you. How would he?
The flight was really neat, yeah.
Although Will causes a lot of trouble and conflict in the family, he's also part of the family and gives a lot of life and energy, maybe more than the family really wants.
From the minute you walked in that door, you've been a one-man wrecking crew, trying to tear down what's taken a lot of hard work to build up.
But the reality is that his influence and personality shows in the other characters, especially in Carlton.
Carlton Banks. Yo, what's up?
The point is this, the Fresh Prince theme, or any theme song for that matter, isn't all about just sounding good from a technical level. It has to represent the show on a much deeper level for it to hit the audience on a deeper level. That could include representing the main character, the plot of the show, or even the feelings people get from watching it. Treating all of these as part of the music is ultimately what gets a theme to fit with the show. And when you do that, the song will last.
Can't you see? Sometimes your words just hypnotize me, and I just love your flashy ways. Guess that's why they're broken. You're so paid.
Sicker than your average. Pop a twist cabbage off instinct. Niggas don't think shit stink. Pink Gators, my Detroit players. Tim's from my hooligans in Brooklyn. Dead right. If they head right, Biggie there.